Today is June 14th, 2023. This is the Provo City Planning Commission meeting. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight, and we will start with our Pledge of Allegiance, which will be given by Melissa Kendall.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Melissa. Okay, our items tonight are all, what's the word I'm looking for? Legislative, which means that they are changing the language of the ordinance. So we would just be making recommendations to the municipal council on these items. We will not be making final decisions on them. We do not have that authority. We will start with a roll call. We'll have each commissioner give their name and then state whether they have a conflict of interest with any of the agenda items tonight.
Jeff Whitlock, no conflicts.
Raylene Walling, no conflicts.
Lisa Jensen, no conflicts.
Daniel Gonzalez, no conflicts.
Robert Knudsen, no conflicts.
Melissa Kendall, no conflicts.
Thank you. All right, we'll jump right in and start with item number 1. Development Services requests ordinance text amendments to chapters 9.15, use of sidewalks and streets, and 9.31, parking regulations to clarify regulations for street parking. This has citywide application and will be presented to us by Sandy Busio.
Hello. Okay. This is a proposed text amendment to 9.51. Currently, the text amendment, or currently the text has, as you can see, has sidewalks that are cluttered with debris, sidewalk clippings, yard clippings, such as that. But the text amendment would clarify that any obstruction would not be allowed. The current text only has yard waste and other landscaping items that does not specify obstructions. What we're concerned with is these types of things. As the objects are left on sidewalks or roadways, they can be hazardous to public safety, and they are also unsightly in our neighborhoods. Parking enforcement are unable to write parking citations to these single axle trailers because they are 750 pounds less and they are not required to have registration. So without a VIN number or a current license plate, we cannot write parking citations. So we're asking for this amendment to give us some authority. So if we do need to go in and clean up or remove these items for this side of the street or these sidewalks, the homeowner would or could be held responsible for the price of that cleanup. Do you have any questions on this text amendment?
You're going to do the other one separately?
You tell me, whichever you would prefer. The other one is language.
Do them both and then we'll ask all of our questions.
Oh, we've already went to the second item. All right, the next one is proposed language. This is a new proposal that would address using streets for parking of recreation vehicles, boats, and trailers. Now, I want to clarify this and be very clear. This is only for boats, recreation vehicles, and trailers parked on the public street. This does not have or does not include anything parked on private property. There's been kind of some confusion on that. In parking enforcement, we received numerous complaints of trailers and recreation vehicles parking extended periods of time on the public street. Currently, they are included in the same ordinance 9.31050 that requires vehicles to move a minimum of 400 feet, but then can be reparked in the same spot, and the 72 hours starts all over again. This would require that if, again, recreation vehicles, boats, or trailers park on the city street and leave, the 72 hours still remains into effect. They have to be removed off of the public street after that 72 hours. And we have put a provision in here that we think will be very helpful. It's a 7-day permit. We understand that we're a town that has condominiums, apartments, yards, and so we are trying to make it easier for owners of especially trailers that need to do extensive yard work or looking for home renovations. Even if you have a visitor that come, we want to be able to offer a 7-day permit that will allow that trailer to be parked out there. There's certain criteria that they have to meet, and the one very important is it cannot be lived in or dwelled in for that 7 days. That's not what this whole purpose is. This purpose is just to allow, again, sometimes you need it longer than the 72 hours if you're doing a project. And so we want to make that available to our residents. These are the kind of things that we're looking at. We have, Sea-Doo trailers. We have these RVs, the trailers. They are not moving. And when they do move, they're moving back and forth just a little, or they're moving and coming back into the exact same place. Neighborhoods are complaining. We get concerns. And one other thing that this new language would address is that if you do have a trailer or an RV parked, it has to be parked in front of your residence, especially for that 7-day permit. It can't be parked in another part of town. So that would be something when they do apply for that 7-day permit. Okay.
If they have frontage that's not big enough for them, they can be parked close by their house. You're just trying to prevent them from parking all over the city.
Or parked, yes, just on the west side of I-15. Yes, or parked. One other thing that we do notice is if we get a concern of a trailer parked in front of a home, we'll go and we'll mark it either by electronic or chalk, and then we find it in front of the neighbor's house, and then the next neighbor's house, and then original location. We're just trying to prevent that.
All right, commissioners, any questions for Ms. Busio? Mr. Knudsen?
Do you think that they need to come back in every 7 days and renew the permit? Say someone's doing a month job. Is it kind of, and he goes the first 7 days, comes in, does it right, gets his permit. Then the 7 days is gone, he's got to come in again. And he's got to come in again, he's got to come in again.
Yes.
Is there a way that he can tell you, I need a month permit, or I need a 2-week permit? So he doesn't have to keep coming in, because the tendency would be, I got the permit the first time, I'm too busy to go back and get it again.
No, between the 7-day permits, there needs to be a 72-hour period. Right now, after 72 hours, it needs to be removed off the city street as the ordinance is written now. So we are extending that time again to 7 days. Then they would need to remove the trailer off of the road for 72 hours, and then they would be eligible for another permit. And as far as coming in, it can be done online. Okay. And right now we are going through the process where we'll have a parking app, and it could be done by app, and then it would come to me. So we are trying to make that 7-day permit more convenient.
But in answer to Mr. Knudsen's question, it wouldn't be possible to have it there for a month. You would have to have it on a shorter term than that.
You'd have to have 7 days. You'd have to remove it 72 hours and then another 7 days. Yes, correct.
And I see here that you can only get a 7-day permit 6 times in a year.
That's right. Yes.
I have a question. What sort of a cost are you looking at? Is it mostly just to make sure that someone's accounting for the location of their vehicle, or is it a fairly hefty cost?
There is no cost. We feel that if residents are trying to comply and just making us aware of that 7 days, that we'll grant the permit. There is no cost for this.
That seems very generous. Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? On either of these proposals, the debris on the streets and sidewalks or the recreation vehicles, etc.? Mr. Pepperoni?
I'm going to ask that the planning commission not to make a recommendation on this. We're going to withdraw it as an action item. I'm apologize for the mistake that was made, but we only bring code amendments to the planning commission if they're to Title 14 or 15. So
And
consider
this is
this,
the police one?
this is Title 9. So,
Okay.
right. So just consider this kind of a report of the legislation that will be going to the city council, but we don't need a planning commission motion on this.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, because it relates to so many of the other things we've been hearing, I appreciate your, is it helpful, Mr. Pepperoni, for us to give any comments or suggestions before it goes? I mean, they have no legal standing, but since we've heard it, if anyone has any suggestions for the staff to take to the city council based on what you've seen or any concerns?
I would also say that since we put it on the agenda, if there's somebody here that would like to speak to it, we should allow them to speak.
Okay.
Thank you.
The two things that I thought of as I read through this were, once again, how is it going to be enforced? Is it going to be by complaints or just drive-by ticketing? Like, what's the manpower on that? And obviously you don't need to answer because we're not making a decision, but just to make sure that that is addressed. And then if they have to get a permit, do they have to post it somewhere on the exterior of the vehicle so that people in the neighborhood know that it's a permitted use instead of worrying about it being there? So you don't get a million calls about this vehicle. That's just something to consider in the process.
I have answers to both of those.
Okay, let's hear it.
As far as posting, all permits are done electronically. So the neighbors would not be able to see a permit. We would do it with the LPR, but most neighbors, if you see active, again, yard or home renovations, most neighbors are very considerate of that.
Okay.
The first one, I'm nervous. So what was your first?
It was
Manpower.
How's it enforced by complaints or drive-by ticketing?
Right now, we try to do both. We don't have the staffing for drive-by ticketing. We will, and we do, but most are complaint basis. And then when
Okay.
we go to the neighborhood, most are chalk.
But
But thank you.
the other one I had a concern about was, we have this ordinance allowance that says you can have as many vehicles as you can provide off-street parking for. Yet this ordinance is essentially saying we want to provide more off-street parking for houses. So I just wanted to be careful that in doing this, which is important, we're not negating the initial importance of the language requiring those off-street parking spaces for residents to have. Because we're just basically saying, don't park your garbage here, park your car here, and then you put your garbage in your garage. And anyway, it's sort of counterproductive, but I don't know that there's a good answer for it. So, all right, commissioners, any other feedback for Ms. Bucio? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone who has come tonight to comment on this item, not realizing that we weren't making a decision? Public comment? Okay, excellent. I don't believe we need a motion since we have no decision or recommendation to pass along, so we can just move on to item number 2. Item number 2. We're going to have the staff present it first.
Oh, sorry.
Barry Finch requests an ordinance text amendment to section 14.08.020. These are permitted uses in the A1 zone to add meeting halls for rent as a new conditional use in the A1 agricultural zone. This has a citywide application, and Mr. Wright is filling in for Mr. Ardmore apparently.
Correct.
And he is a staff member for the Development Services Department that will present this item to us.
All right, thank you very much. So this item is a request to amend the ordinance for the agricultural zone. And as you can see here on the screen, it's showing what that amendment would be down there in blue. So in each of our zones, we have a section for permitted and conditional uses, and then they're listed out like this. And so under the conditional use section in the agricultural zone, they would like to add meeting halls for rent as a new use in that zone. Staff has had some concerns with what's being proposed. this type of use in an agricultural zone and what impacts it could have. Like we mentioned, it's a citywide amendment, and so it's not only for the specific property that the applicant has, but it would be for all agricultural zones throughout the city. So that's important to consider as we amend code for a specific zone. But here's an example, which is the applicant's property which is on agricultural land and it's adjacent to residential zone. This is fairly commonly seen throughout the city, and issues that would come from the potential use of meeting halls for rent would be increased traffic that would be coming to and from the site, again, through and around these residential neighborhoods, and increased noise and light and things like that that would come from events that are being held in the evenings. And so those are concerns that were presented to staff, or from staff to the applicant. The applicant has expressed in the staff report some ways to mitigate that, or attempt to mitigate some of those concerns presented by staff. But finally, I think the big thing is in the agricultural zone, there's a chapter or section heading about the purpose and objectives of the zone. And it's designed and intended to protect the agricultural uses from encroachment of urban development. So we see that this use wouldn't be harmonious with that statement, and that it wouldn't be incidental to the agricultural zone. So staff is not supportive of the proposed amendment and recommends that it's forwarded on to the municipal council with a negative recommendation to deny the request. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you'd have.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Wright?
The under neighborhood issues on this first page, it talks about the fact that does the amendment have to apply to all A1 zones? Is there just an A1 zone for agriculture? There's no other zones? Is that right? There's just agriculture, just A1?
So A1 is the agricultural zone, and then there's subzones. So those would be A11 or A15, meaning that there'd be different acreage.
Would that be the
requirements.
acreage?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so this would apply to all the A1 zones in the city.
Correct.
What do you think of a conditional use or a special use permit for something like this? Because we don't necessarily want to grant it
Blanket across the
Citywide.
board.
like citywide without any exception, but just it would be a conditional use or a special use, just like a drive-through restaurant or any of these other special uses that we have, that they have to meet, certain exacting conditions before we consider it. Is that,
Yeah. So
how's staff feel about that?
yeah, I mean, a conditional use, I think it's important to kind of look at that as almost like a permitted use, essentially, that can have conditions placed on it to mitigate some of the foreseen concerns that that use would bring. I think, though, with this one, it's challenging I think there's a lot of things the applicant mentioned in their letter to the Planning Commission. I think there's just a lot that would be challenging to still mitigate potential impacts. I think that's important to remember with a conditional use permit is that, they are essentially a permitted use. And so once you allow it in that zone, if we're looking at specific properties, we got to take into consideration that there's going to be other properties throughout the city that sit next to something different that maybe we haven't considered. And again, I think with the conditional use, it still isn't one that fits very well in the agricultural zone as far as the purpose and objective is outlined here. So if we were to add something like that, we would probably need to be looking at amending the text in that paragraph to modify what it's trying to protect and accomplish with that zone.
I had the same question as Mr. Gonzalez, that I can appreciate that we want to preserve an open area, but we want to make sure that anything that is allowed to be done in that open area not only preserves it, but has enforceable restrictions on it. And so I would love to see a way to do creative things that give people more options for their land, but to do it in a way that doesn't open a can of worms citywide. And I feel like you said, because the A1 zone falls in different locations citywide, as it is, there's not a universal application to it that I would feel safe with.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Perfect.
please.
Just some dumb questions here. So conditional use permit would be required to be, they would need to receive a conditional use permit in order to use it, correct? Or anybody in the future?
Correct. Yeah, they'd have to apply for a conditional use permit and go through
But not with this language. I thought this language was making a permitted use.
it is putting that use under the conditional use.
Oh, okay.
Section in
Forgot
the
that's how it was.
A1s.
So it's basically saying this is one of the things that you could
Oh, it is.
apply for a conditional use permit under, one of the uses, correct?
Correct.
So theoretically, you could address a lot of these concerns on a case-by-case basis underneath the conditions of the conditional use permit, right?
Yeah, I mean, that would be the goal of a conditional use permit, is to try to foresee what those concerns would be and find appropriate ways to apply conditions. It's challenging, I think, when you're talking about increased traffic, how to put conditions on that, or other impacts that are going to be an impact. And so you got to be able to scale it and say, is that potential impact something that's going to be appropriate for this zone citywide, and still be harmonious with the intent of that zone. And that's where staff doesn't feel like this proposed use would fit in that category.
Would taking the time to really go in depth and broaden the condition, like beef up conditions on these types of venues? Maybe it's because we don't have a really good set of conditions, but in any like dance hall, meeting hall, reception center, like the issue, well, there's always the standard traffic type stuff, but a huge issue is alcohol. Like, if there's alcohol, there's usually problems. If there's no alcohol, there's usually not problems. You don't get a lot of complaints. But I don't know. I without having established conditions for those types of uses, or a really enforceable good set of conditions, I wouldn't want to.
I feel like it's too dangerous.
Yeah.
I think if there's no, do you have another question, Mr. Whitlock?
I did. I just saw in the staff report that maybe it wasn't explicitly said, but it seemed like it was implied that there was other options that were potentially given to the applicant, but this was the path that was chosen. Could you provide any additional context there?
Yeah, I wasn't involved in those conversations. This was Aaron that was working on it, so I'm not exactly sure what that might have been, but.
Yeah, because what I'm specifically referring to is where it says, after speaking with staff about what would need to be done, the applicant chose to propose a text amendment. So I was just curious about other potential paths.
Mr. Pepperoni?
Yes, the applicants did meet with me, and we did talk about the most obvious impacts that could happen from something like this. And the property owner, the applicant, was encouraged to submit to the staff some language for how those things could be mitigated. And I think that's in your staff report. So that's the meeting, I think, that's being referred to. And that language that they suggested in your staff report, that was a result of that meeting. Right.
Do you have a question, Ms. Kendall?
I was just going to say on page 3, it does give some suggestions that maybe were talked about: pumpkin patches, corn mazes, and educational activities.
as far as other uses. I think that was also on page 8, that there's lots of things listed in the applicant statement of other ways that these agricultural lands have been used by other people to bring in business. I'm wondering so I'm going to turn the time over to the applicant to address us.
Just one more question. I'm hoping I didn't overlook it, Dustin, but what's the current agricultural use on the property? Is there an agricultural use or agricultural operations on the property, or is it just zoned agricultural?
We could have the applicant answer that for you too. Okay, is that okay? Because what I'm
Well,
gonna,
just in case there's different responses.
all right, staff, if you have a different answer, you have my permission to jump up and down and wave your hands and we'll call on you. But we're gonna let the applicant present theirs, and while they're doing that, Mr. Wright or Mr. Pepperoni, if you have two things I would love to know in making a decision or not, are there other properties that have done this successfully in Provo that may not be agricultural properties that have similar settings? And then if you maybe could show us a map of the area that shows how it is in relation to the surrounding properties, some sort of Google map or something, that would be awesome to have. All right, I think we give you 15 minutes. So just in case that's.
I can't say much. He knows me. I can't say much in 15 minutes.
You got 15 minutes and we'll keep a timer up so you don't have to keep track of it yourself.
All right. I'm Barry Finch. This is my wife, Judy. My family's here. We've lived on a farm down in the west end of Provo for the last 35 years. I've ran that. My dad was here since 1956. He managed it for the church farm, and we were able subsequently to buy that property. So that would make us almost 75 years earning our living full-time, no part-time job, a full-time job, earning a living now. The reason we're here is we want to preserve that lifestyle. It's very important to us. It may not be any important to anybody else, but it's important to us. And I think it's important to other people too. But I've got there on the slide, traditional farming in Provo is almost gone. People might scoff at that, but let's look at the map. In the 1950s,
How does it look?
this is a map of the 1950s. This is the east end of Provo. But you can see up here all kinds of open space. I mean, this is BYU essentially, but open space everywhere, farms everywhere. I know that when my dad moved here in 1956, there were 23 dairy farms, 23. That's just dairy farms. Other kinds of farms would have been here as well. There currently is 0 dairy farms in Provo. As far as I know, there's only one farmer that is left in Provo that is a traditional farmer that makes his living completely from this. I know Mr. Knutson very well. He has what I call a hobby farm. It's not that it's not a big job, but he has other sources of income. Hasn't lived there forever and ever and ever and run that as a farm for his income. If we look on this map, this is today. The A1 zone that you were referring to is in green. So go to the next slide. You can see there are little tiny pockets up on the east end, but most of it comes along the Parkway corridor where the new road has come in. You can see where the new road comes in, that's splitting. Can you point on does everybody see the road? Can you see the road? It's essentially dividing 33 farms in half. That road went through 33 farms. So to be honest, what would that map look like in that area, say 10 years from now, or even 5 years from now? How much green would be on there? Very likely there'll be next to none. The price of the property now will be commercial or residential, and the farmers, having been cut in half, will be forced to sell. The next slide.
I don't have any control of the slides. Are you doing the slide?
There's a clicker.
So the other agricultural area, according to the map, is surrounding the municipal airport. We know that there are plans to expand that airport. And so that green also in the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to disappear. It just is. So what that leaves us with is pockets of agriculture. That's the future. Traditional farming is dead. We can talk about how can we help the farmers. It's dead. Way too late to talk about that. But what we can do is think forward. What we can do is see how farming is being transferred today, not in the 1980s. Let's turn this. The staff member referred to the purposes and objectives of A1. He reads that different than I do. Let me read it to you. It says the A1 zone is designed and intended to protect agriculture uses from encroachment of urban development until such time as residential, commercial, or industrial uses in such areas become necessary and desirable. In other words, I'm the landlord of my property until someone above me decides that something's necessary or desirable. That's not enough security for my family. I've lived here for 70 years on that farm. We've had a Finch on that farm for 70 years. And as soon as someone decides that it's desirable, that it becomes something else. I don't think that's the respect that local farmers ought to have towards them, and I don't think it's what the purpose of government is either. Let me give you an example. We talked about the road that came in. So we could have put the road 400 feet further south, but we didn't. We went through the middle of 33 farms. We could have gone south of those farms, but we didn't. The first development to go in along the corridor is a sports park. That took my farm. Okay, I was renting. I shouldn't say my farm. I feel like it's my farm because I've rented my entire life. I'm 56 years old. I've lived on that property and rented it for 56 years. My dad longer than that. And so when they felt like a ballpark was necessary or desirable, they condemned 100 acres of farm ground, prime farm ground that's irrigatable, that had the best water rights in the state, and they turned it into ballparks. And this is what's happening all over the country, day in and day out, to local farmers. We hold the property until someone says that there's a more important use. Let's go to the staff review. They had two issues. One was the impact on neighbors. The second was that we're putting a commercial business on an agricultural zone. So let's talk about the first one, the impact on neighbors. So this is my neighborhood. I can't see the pointer here. Right there. All right. That's the home that I live in. Directly above that is my sister's home. Directly above that is the home I grew up in, which I also own. Okay. The proposed building that we would be building is right there. I don't think it's been mentioned that what we would be looking to do is having weddings, quinceañeras, family reunions, farm tour events, there's no limit to what we could do inside that building. As you can see where the entry is, we talk about, well, let me just say that the concerns for the neighborhood were threefold. One was traffic, one was noise, and one was lights. Well, the traffic on that road, that is a collector road that comes into our farm directly. It's a collector road that goes to the school. If you came down and then turn and go down 2470 in front of my home, at the end of that road is the only access, current access anyway, to the sports park. So if we're talking about traffic, first of all, the road should be adequate for my 70 cars at maximum that I would have for an event. How many cars are going to be there? 60, 70 for an event? A collector road that can't handle an additional 70 cars is built wrong. This would be after school. When they pick up for school, there's hundreds of cars in the same location. The traffic from the new sports park will be many factors of 10 or 20 or 30 times what I'm proposing. Noise. If you look to the north is a school and a church, and what you don't see is Mr. Knutsen's field. And what do you think, maybe Bob, 1,000 feet to Center Street or something like that? So 3.5 blocks, whatever that is, to the nearest house. 3.5 blocks going that way. Going south, you see a hayfield. The closest house is probably about 500 feet. I didn't step it. By the way, we have here that we can submit to you, but we have neighbors on 280 South, so the north of them, the 2470 West, and also the one down here. So on all three sides that we actually have houses, we have signed from our neighbors that are the most close that they were not opposed to that project. So the noise, obviously we're going to have to comply with noise ordinances. But we have I mean, if there was a perfect place to put something like this, here it is. Okay? Lights, same thing. The parking is all in the back. It's removed. You can't even see the parking from the road. There's no neighbor that could see the parking. It would be akin, I have a neighbor that has a big screen TV, and I can see it's like 600 feet away, and I can see what he's watching on television. That's kind of what the light situation would be like. We proposed mitigation plans. We got a positive response for that. One of the problems, I'm very familiar with the Hispanic culture. I interact with Hispanics more than I do white people. I've done it so my whole entire life. The problem you have, and I know talking with the staff, they were very nervous about being burned like they've been burned before up in town with venues like this, with Hispanics, where there's drug abuse, there's calls to the police, there's alcohol abuse, there's violent attacks and so forth. And the parties go on until 2, 3 in the morning. Well, we live here. We're not trying to do something like that. We're not trying to sneak under the covers and try to do something that's not going to be good for the neighborhood. What happens in those parties, and I know them well, somebody's going to pay 5, 6, 7, 8 grand to have that party. Those quinceañeras sometimes will go as high as $30,000. $30,000. They're invested when they're 100 or 150 people that they've invited to the party. The problem is there's no closed parking, there's no security, and so another 200 people come. Those people come to sell their wares, whether it's drugs or alcohol. They come to flirt with the girl that that guy's with, and then they starts a fight, and they come to cause a nuisance. And then the late hours causes problems as well. Our proposals for mitigation would be to close the entrance. If a party starts at 6, we close the parking lot at 6:30. We have a parking attendant. We have security on board all the time. We have a hostess inside the facility to work as a liaison between the person that's having the event and the person who would be working as security. Anyway, there's a lot of mitigation things. The main concern the city had, or the staff had, was the idea of the commercial building on a commercial business on an agricultural zone. Let me show you some new things. We have, where's my definitions? Well, I didn't even go over the positive, I'm running out of time, but there are positive impacts for the neighborhood as well that kind of show up in these pictures. Our place has always been open to the community. my wife, these are pictures from our farm where things are going on in the community. But the main thing I want to talk about now is this commercial thing. It says agritainment. Agritainment is a new word for us. Started in about 27, and in the following 10 years, between 27 and 2017, became $1 billion industry. Thousands and thousands, I think it's over almost 30,000 farms have agritainment sources of income coming in. So what is agritainment? Go back to the definition, please. Agritainment is simply providing an opportunity for entertainment in an agricultural setting. Agritourism, any agriculturally based operation or activity that brings visitors to a farm or ranch. These are huge. It's $1 billion industry. If you want a local comment about it, Utah State being an agricultural college, you go to their website and there's link after link after link of this, talking about barn weddings. I hope you read the things that I put in the file. These are things, I put some in there if you noticed. All of my research comes from the USDA website. United States Department of Agriculture. So all due respect to the staff, who I'm sure they've treated us well and they've treated us with respect, and we're trying to do the same, but we disagree. I am far more qualified to tell them what agriculture is than they are to tell me. Just like they would be more qualified to tell me things about developing a city. But if we need a third source, here it is. The USDA, the NRCS. The NRCS is conservation. We're talking about conserving land. And they're in promoting this and saying weddings and venues to bring people to the farm and bring that connection is a viable part. In those articles that you hopefully have read, it talked about couples who saved their farm because they were stumbled into a wedding venue operation. The reason we would say Utah State defines it this way, and I know I'm almost out of time and I'll wrap up. Utah State, a local college that's the most respected in agriculture, defines agritourism this way. They say any facility that uses agriculture to bring people to the farm. That's their definition. It was sent out to thousands of people as a research on how we could do better in that field of agritourism. So any facility that uses agriculture, how are we going to use agriculture? We're just doing weddings. We're going to have a bride come up on a horse and buggy. Can't do that in the city. We're going to have a petting zoo right next to in a barn, right next to the place that we would be doing the wedding in. You can't do that in the city.
Time.
Anyway, there's a list of many things that we will do. Agrophotography. You want your daughter to take a picture of her in her wedding gown with a goat? I'm your guy. We can do that. Please. We've almost killed farming in Provo. We've almost done it. The future of farming, if we want to look forward, this is it. These little pockets that make a 10-acre farm interesting and fun for the community. It's no longer the 200 acres growing hay and cattle. That's a thing of the past. Might be somewhere else, but it's not happening here. So I appreciate you listening to me. Went over for a minute. That's pretty good for me.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Mr. Finch?
Yeah.
Mr. Knudsen?
Go ahead. Go.
You talk about in here, Barry, that you would build a new barn and to show where it's going to be.
Yeah.
Would you build that? Would he be qualified, or would he be responsible? Maybe Mr. Wright could tell us. Would he be responsible to build that under present code? In other words, all of the plumbing, everything would have to be
I'll
built
answer it. Yes.
new. It would have to be all brand new, right? Would have to fit all of the present codes that are being used for construction nowadays.
This would be a project that would have to meet code, would have to submit plans, would have to have a project manager or architects, all that stuff, drawings, all of that stuff. We're not trying to put some half-baked
Well, that's what I'm
tin
concerned about.
building.
Because
We're putting a venue. There are venues all over the state.
And you have-
Walker Farms has one that's right smack in a subdivision. So where a house should be in the subdivision, there's Walker Farm venue. And their neighbor is as close as your house is to your neighbor. There's no problems there because they build a building that costs many hundreds of thousands of dollars. The staff have talked about, well, if we did this here, we could do it anywhere. Nobody's motivated. They're going to sell out. They're going to sell out to subdivisions. They're not going to reinvest. The only person that's crazy enough to reinvest the kind of money that we would be investing is somebody that wants to pass it on to his kids. How am I supposed to pass a farm on to my kids? They go off and get jobs while I'm still working and trying to make a living. Then when they're 50, they come back and supposed to be farmers. But this is something that I can maintain. And we talk about preservation or conservation of farmlands. There's no reason why my kids would ever sell that farm, ever. The existing use on it is a horse farm. I have all kinds of animals, 70 different people who rent from me and are there daily with their families and having family events. By the way, without police officers coming, without any headaches or things that have been associated with those kinds of things in the past. So.
Mr. Knutson, did that answer your question?
Well, I've got a dozen more. If anybody else wants to go ahead, take their turn. The other night, you had something there, Saturday night. You couldn't get down the street. I see you did try to park some cars in there. There were some cars parked in your parking, but most of them were parked on 2470. I couldn't even get down the street. That's a narrow street. By the time people park on both sides of it, I know you've written in great detail about how you would manage the parking, but people are still going to park where they want to park.
That's not true. The
No,
event
it's
that we
true.
had on well, let me answer the question.
Well, you didn't do it Saturday night. So what's going to be any different?
The fact that the venue will be built, the fact that they will have designated parking, the fact that the yard now, this was the wedding we had the other night was at our home in our backyard. We've all gone to those and we park wherever we can park. Interestingly, the lady that was talking here before us was talking about an issue. The whole top of John's hayfield was already filled with cars. We put a sign, parking and nobody saw it. But if we will have a parking attendant, Bob, we're going to have a parking attendant. We've committed to do that. What are you going to tear down? You know, when you had the fire a number of years ago and stuff burned down, then you rebuilt the horse barns. I hoped at the time that they would be something that would be attractive. They're not. They're not attractive. And do they have the same quality? Do they have a better quality? Do they have more safety now than in order to build this? Yes.
Which ones? Just the ones where that sign shows?
I can show you, but again, I think I'd stand up with any farm on the valley as far as how it looks. I don't know that our barns look any different than anybody else. They're all covered with tin on the roof. They have a cement concrete wall that goes up 4 feet to anchor them down. We haven't built anything. I invite you to walk by and take a look at what we've got. You're more than welcome. I'll take you for a tour.
Just to answer your question also, this is going to be a nice barn that will pass all code with the city. It's going to be a beautiful barn.
This is hundreds.
The income from that will enable us to do more beautification in the yard where the existing horse corrals are. The center is where the fire was, and the center is pretty much open right now. Got horse corrals around. So we're going to build in the middle. We can do more with the income. We can do more beautification around the outside.
And I will mention too, that the fire that we had, I don't know how long ago, was it 4 years or something like that? Was caused by someone who did not rent from me. He was parking at the school and snuck into my barn after. Part of that was the fact that I don't have a closed gate, which I don't know many farmers that do on their yard, but I'm going to put a closed gate with access numbers for the people who actually rent from me. So, I mean, I don't know what else I can do. Our farm will be more beautiful because of this. It will be asphalted. It's this, where's the,
That's the now. So we're gonna build in the middle.
that's the now. Where's the, I don't know how to run that.
This is a pointer. Pointer that, then
Lisa, can I ask some questions for a minute? Just
Yeah,
while this map.
This is
up.
the area that we
Yes.
had a fire in. I've built that barn and I've built that barn. They're on concrete. You know, I'm sorry if they're not beautiful. Not everybody can put a beautiful fancy barn, but they are covered with tin and they're nicely built and they've been rented out since the day they were built. So
What's
they're a
over
source
in
of
that
income to
corner?
me. All of this area here, including this, will be cleaned out. And so the barn will go in this area. People will come in and access the parking area this way. So-
Miss Kendall had a question with this map.
Since the map is up, my question was, what are those structures on the outside of the square? What do you use
Here
them for?
and here,
Mhm.
these things, all of these are, we run a horse boarding business.
Okay,
And so each one of these are filled with animals. All of these, all of these, all of these back here, our property runs to about 500 feet from here. And so I have a barn here, 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 and barns here. And each one of those have about at least a half acre pasture with them so that the horses and animals can run free. These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 have an acre. So it's just one barn with an acre of land on it. These are tighter. It's just a stall or a stall area where they can have whatever their needs are. I charge by the space that I offer. But every one of those places is full and has been full for 2-3 years.
so your current farm use is not for producing anything but for animals,
We're a
correct?
ranch now.
You're a ranch.
We've been a farm forever. I ran 100 acres. I've grown millions and millions and millions of pounds of pumpkins.
But do
I've
you do that
sent-
now?
I don't do that now.
Okay.
My farm now is a ballpark,
Oh, I see. So now your farm is how many acres?
10 acres.
10 acres. And so,
It's a
What you-
pocket of agriculture, which
and
is,
do you also, do you have livestock that is sold for beef, for example, cows that are beef cows? No.
I personally don't have any beef. I don't enjoy doing that. First cow I get will be the last one. But what I do have is a business where I rent space. So we have a few cows in the yard. We have sheep in the yard. We have llamas in the yard. We
So
have
other
horses and
people
ponies. Uh-huh.
can do
There's all
that.
kinds of animals there.
Okay. And so the structures that would remain are the ones on the outside perimeter of that square, minus the one that's kind of in the
The
middle.
demolition area would be right here.
Okay.
That makes sense?
And the
And
others
so
would
we would
stay.
have to asphalt this whole area or landscape it, and it will be a combination of the two.
And so everything else would stay and function the way it is.
Yes, but we're obviously, this would be needing to have a facelift. These barns, that barn right there was built in probably the 40s. Okay.
1840.
Well, my dad built it, so it wasn't that early, but it was in the, probably in the 50s, because that's when he came over. But that's one of the original buildings on the farm. That's one that survived the fire. These buildings here have been there since I was a little boy. This one has been there since before I was born. And so it's time to take that out. But this one, we can afford to do some facelifts. If you're just running cows in them or horses or something like that, who cares how they look like? On the backside, I have tin covering every bit of it. Every bit of it, every bit of the roof and every bit, it's been done within the last 3 years. Every one of these, this is a new building that I built. It's got brand new tin on it. So, you know, this is buildings that have been only built for 3 years.
So Miss Kendall, you had another question?
I just have one more. So how will you mitigate the smell? Because I love a farm too, but if it's all animals, there's a distinct odor. And if you're doing a nice venue, it's going to smell like.
Well,
That's what I wondered.
That's why
How
people wanna
close are the
come. They want
horses
The farm. They want
gonna be to the-
farm.
I guess that would be, the concern would be for the person who's booking it. If they're gonna pay 6, 7 grand and they have to deal with the smell, that's not a citywide problem. That's a them problem, I would think.
So you're not.
There's
worried
a
that
certain
people
amount of
aren't gonna
farm,
wanna
there
do
isn't
that?
anything you can do. I mean, the cows go to the bathroom. And
Right,
so we
but-
do the best we can. We run a clean place. Our manure pile is right there. Okay? Our barn will be up here. There's no houses this way. I mean, we do the best we can, but farms have smells. I always joke we've gotten along over the years with the principals here at the school. I think it's good once in a while that the kids can smell, sorry, but cow shit. Okay? Let them know that things happen, right? I mean, this farm's been here for 75 years. I can't start worrying about smells now.
Okay, does that answer your question?
They're worried about smells and they can get married on the other side.
That's the point where you say at the.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna have commissioners ask questions. Mr. Gonzalez, I've been making you wait for a long time. Have you forgotten what it was you wanted to ask?
No, I know what I was going to ask, and I think Commissioner Kendall and Commissioner Newton ferreted that out with the agriculture use is boarding horses for other people, leasing space for other people's animals, whether they be.
We're a ranch.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No question.
All right, Mr. Knutson, did you get all your questions answered? Okay. Mr. Whitlock?
Thank you. I just have, just one kind of line of questioning. So just so I understand correctly, the reason why you're sort of going this path of changing the permitted conditional permits for A1 is because you want to keep your property A1, and you have to do that because you're going to continue this ranch business.
Yes.
You can't rezone it to other zones or else the ranch business would become impermissible.
Correct. And we talked about that with Mr. Pepperoni, and the first suggestion was to just rezone it, but that doesn't, we're trying to make this, again, we have always farmed 100 acres and for the last several years, and now we're down to 10, but we can still make a living. We can still make a living and we can preserve this agricultural, and our neighbors that are closest to us and most impacted have signed waivers that they are kind of in favor of the project.
Okay.
Are you referring to the Hinkley's?
Am I what?
The Hinkley properties, is that the ones that are in favor of this? I looked at the county property records and it showed Hinkley.
I did not talk to the Hinkleys. The Hinkleys are 2,000 feet from my house. What I did talk to
But
is.
they own the property immediately south of.
Yes,
of
but
these three homes.
if the impact of the
And to the west.
neighborhood is noise, lights, and traffic, I don't see how that would impact the people that are 2,000 feet away from me. But it will impact these people, and we got signatures from them. We got signatures from them. I own these 3 houses, or our family does. And over here on this other side of this hayfield, right in this area, we got signatures here as well. Because so the closest roads to where the lights, the traffic, and the noise would impact. That was the concerns the city had.
But none of those other properties are zoned A1, right?
Correct. To my knowledge, I mean, it should be residential, all of them. John Hinckley would be resident or agriculture, whatever. I don't know what he is.
But he
85 or 830.
lives at the bottom of that very, very large piece of property.
This is his field here, and it goes back here, and he runs the farm west of us
Yeah.
down to the airport road.
Got it.
But his home is, it might be 3,000, it's probably closer to 3,000 feet away. It's closer to the airport road than it is to Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for
Okay.
answering all of our questions.
Okay, thank you.
We may ask you more as we go, but for now you can sit down.
Can I just say too, any of you that want to come down to my place, you want to walk the place, Bob, if you have concerns about the quality of the place we have, come down and see it.
Thank you. I want to remind us, sometimes when we're making a broad decision, it's, we have to look at this narrow focus decision to sort of figure out how it works. But our intent tonight is to decide whether a general ordinance text amendment for all A1 zones would be something we would recommend to the municipal council. So I feel like we've sort of had an idea of how it would look and feel here. And so as we continue to get comments and as we continue to have questions, if we can not forget to process it through the broader scope. So we may decide that we like it in this sense, but we don't like it citywide, and we maybe need to figure out how to make that work, or the other way around. So don't forget that as we listen. We will now open the meeting up for public comments. The first public comments we would take would be from a neighborhood chair. So if there's anyone from the district neighborhood representation that would like to come up and share something from the District 3 meeting, or is District 3 even this neighborhood? Yes, thank you. To make sure we're getting feedback from the right person. Okay, so according to the staff report, they just said there may be issues, but according to the signatures, that maybe is not the most pressing issue for some of the most adjacent people. Okay, we will give 2 minutes each to anyone else who would like to come up. If you come up, tell us your name and where you live, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm Adam Finch. I live in Eagle Mountain, but I was raised on this farm. This farm is something that is different from anywhere else in Provo. It has a special feel to it. It has been a place of childhood memories. I have friends that love to play on this beautiful, I think it's beautiful, farm. It may need a little facelift, but it's a farm. It's a farm. It doesn't need to be beautiful. There's cows and chickens and all sorts of things that people come to the farm to see. If they want a wedding on a farm, this is what they want. This is something that's special in Provo. There's not very many places like this. So if they wanted to come to a farm to have a farm wedding or a farm quinceañera or whatever they wanted to do, they're going to expect these things. They're going to expect the smell. It's part of it. It's part of the culture. And that's what they're seeking out. And I don't know about citywide, but I don't think there's very many places that would be able to do this in A1 districts. I mean, most of it was on the west side next to Provo Lake. I don't think it's going to be inside the city at all, hardly at all. There's no really A1 properties there. So, and I just think this is a really cool opportunity to get people to come down to a farm and actually experience a farm culture. And I think this is the place to do it. It's always been a beautiful place.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on this item from the public? Mr. Pepperoni, did you have something you needed to add? Yeah, come on up if you want to say something. Okay. Now he's all embarrassed because he stood up and everyone looked at him. All right, everyone look away.
So now would you take the map back over to the airport, north of the airport? Mr. Finch is taking the right approach. If the city is going to allow something like this, the conditional use route is the best way to do it. Just like we have cell towers as a conditional use, and there are a lot of conditions of approval to that. And dance halls have a lot of conditions on those. It would be something like that. The problem is when you have a conditional use, as Mr. Wright was saying, as soon as you make it a conditional use, we lose a lot of control. If the developer or property owners can argue that they meet those criteria, we have to approve it. We lose a lot of control, even with conditional uses. The city actually has an agricultural committee. The agricultural committee is all about preserving farmland. They want to preserve farmland to preserve crops and food production. I don't think the agricultural committee would consider a venue like this as agricultural preservation. I just don't think they would. I'm happy to go run that question past that committee if that has an interest to you. Mr. Knudsen and Mr. Finch both know the farming people and properties and industry better than I do. I'll answer your question, but if you have better knowledge, Robert, please jump in. This property out here is Harry McCord, and those are the greenhouses that you see. Mr. McCord, this is north of the airport. Mr. McCord over the years has had the corn mazes, he's had pumpkin patches, he's had different things, agribusinesses like that we've always allowed. Because the agricultural zones say agricultural-related businesses or agricultural-related activities are permitted. And that's what we would consider those things. We've been talking about the need for a new zoning ordinance for years, and you guys have heard those discussions. One of the biggest reasons we have a need for new zoning ordinance is for 30 to 40 years, we've been amending the code and amending the code and amending the code to the point where it's confusing, it's convoluted, it's difficult to use, it's difficult to interpret. And it's just this type of amendment that we're continually doing that has made it unwieldy. Now we need to actually throw it out and start over again. That's the point we're at. If this door is open to agribusiness, if I were Robert, I'd start raising grain. And as soon as I've got my first grain crop, I'd say, I want an agribusiness of a brew pub. That would be more related to agriculture because it is at least growing the grain on the site. Planning would say, you can't do that, Robert, because manufacturing, changing the grain into something else is manufacturing. And that's not allowed in the A1 zone. So we wouldn't allow that. But if we're going to open the door to agribusiness, and this is a big step in that direction, I'm very fearful of where this will lead. That's why those following the purpose and intent, the purpose and objective section of the zones is very important. It puts up guardrails for us to try to stay within. I didn't know until Mr. Finch just said what he said, that this included taking down one building. That building is bisected by another zone, the RA zone. If this use is going to spill into that zone, which is what he just described it would, we're not just amending the A1 zones, we would need to amend the RA zone, or we would have to rezone his RA property to A1, because we've got a zoning conflict that runs right through that building he was saying was going to have to be taken down. So that was something staff didn't even realize until we just heard that about that building coming down. Mr. Finch did ask about noise, and I told him I didn't think noise needed to be addressed in his ordinance or his proposal because we have a whole section about noise and noise mitigation and noise limits and those kinds of things. That's in Title IX, the one you were looking at earlier. Something that needs to be put in part of his amendments if that's the way the city wants to go. But I don't know if I've adequately answered your questions. That's all I have, unless you have any further questions.
What would you feel about like a vineyard? Yeah, you hear about weddings at vineyard, not in Utah. I don't know, not at least in this part of Utah,
right?
But they're often used like this agribusiness where they're hosting events and they're like that brew pub where they're producing the grapes to wine and selling the wine, having events there.
Yeah, I would say our ordinance right now wouldn't allow that.
Have you been to the Walker Farm
Walker Farm.
Is that the one in Linden?
in Linden? Have you been there before?
Do you
don't think
mean
so.
Wadley Farms?
No, it's in Linden. You can't even find the street to pull into it's in a neighborhood. It's the worst location. I don't even think it's a farm.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how that even got approved, but this is going to happen at some point. And I feel very strongly that this is a great location for this type of a venue. And I think we need to figure out a way to make it happen because it's going to happen at some point. Someone's going to want to do it. And I look at how enclosed it is. I look at how they have family neighbors. I look at how the gate idea I liked, the noise, I would assume it'd be mostly indoors. The traffic, if there's a parking lot and it's, to code where there's enough spots. And even at, like I said, the Walker Farm, you can't even find parking there. And it's in a neighborhood.
I'm not familiar with Walker, but I am Wadley, and Wadley is similar to what you're describing. They do weddings there.
Yeah, well, the Walker Farm is kind of a joke because it's not a farm. It's just shoved into a little neighborhood, but
Don't they have like a silo on the property?
yeah,
to
it's
make it look like a farm?
yeah, yeah. So I just kind of feel strongly that the property is changing over there. And like I said, there's going to be a first. Someone's going to want to do something similar to this, And I just keep thinking there's already a sport facility there There's a school there. I'm like, wow, it's enclosed. I think there needs to be more conversations to try to make this venue work, because
I think one thing that does help is his access situation, the way he would be able to limit access in a very narrow way. I think that does help, yes.
and that we're seeing every time we meet, we're seeing more growth out there. And I just think, why should there not be allowed a nice venue for weddings and events and parties when there's other things that are being built, business parks, sport facilities? That just, to me, I mean, if it was my property, I'd be excited to have it be the first one out there before someone else does it, because it's needed in this area, in my opinion. So.
Any other questions for Mr. Pepperoni? Ms.
I have
Kendall?
So, I mean, I agree, but there's much broader issues here.
Correct.
So we're dealing with this is citywide application. That's problem number one. Problem number two just came up with, we have different zones now. So is there a way to actually rezone his homes into that square so that he has a piece of property where he can do commercial on and then keep his farm?
Can we put that map back up, the one of Mr. Finch's property? So yes, that can be done.
Because that
The
might be a
least
way.
impactful way to Mr. Finch would be to simply expand the agricultural zone for that amount of land that this would impact, that this would need to involve.
But then I guess what I'm wondering is, could we create even a different zone for that part of the property? So his agricultural property remains A1. And then you create a new zone for this new stuff and include his homes in it. So you go clear from the street to a square, and instead of leaving those buildings on that side where your clicker is, you take those buildings down and make all of that property one contiguous zone and, redo those barns on the other side or something. See what I'm saying? So that now you created a zone where he can do that and still have his farmland and keep that too.
So you're talking about kind of a subzone of the A1.
Yes, and then you're not citywide destroying the A1 by your concerns of all sorts of things that could come in, because I think the applicant also needs to understand it's not about you. So you may have a great idea and a great concept and promise to do all these things. It's about the full extent of the decision, which means somebody else in the future can come and, like Mr. Pepperoni said, they have to grant it because you've changed it for everybody. So.
That green area on the map. We know because of the, sorry, I guess I'm all right.
That green area along the corridor of the new road and on the airport, we know that that is going to develop. The highest and greatest use is going to be to sell that into residential or commercial, whichever it's zoned.
Here's the thing.
We keep talking about, somebody's going to do this. What fool would invest $500,000, which is what this is going to take at least? It's not going to be an epidemic of these buildings. I promise you that.
Well, that doesn't matter. What matters is the application, the potential of application. So I would say, think outside the box and think of a way of getting this done. I think we all agree this would be great, right? We like your idea. It's just the way it's being proposed right now.
It's a big can of worms.
Yeah, I can't say yes to this because of the citywide application and because now we're dealing with two zones. But if you go back and rethink this, I think you could make this work. You just have to rethink where you're going to place that building. And you maybe have to rezone your 3 home properties as part of it and maybe come with a new potential zone for that use.
Well, that rezoning is difficult. That's another can of worms.
I think the only zone, see, we're trying to preserve agriculture, and the only zone to be able to have that building would be some kind of commercial. So you're thinking of having a pocket of commercial zoning in the middle of the agriculture?
Well, you're not in the middle of agriculture at all. You're on the fringe, and that's why it would work here. You are absolutely on the fringe. You have a school, you've got a residential zone all around you, and a church. I mean, so this is the perfect place for that sort of pocket.
So, Mr. Pepperoni, is that something that would be possible to have a pocket of commercial right there?
I mean, that seems to be more in violation to what the purpose of the A1 zone was. They said the purpose of the A1 zone was to preserve farm ground. And now we're talking about transferring it over. Every farm every farm has a certain amount of its acreage. If it's a 5,000 acre farm or a 5 acre farm, has a certain amount of its acreage that is its home base, its yard. This is not farmable ground. This is the barnyard that we're taking asphalt. The whole thing is asphalted or dirt, and we're taking non-productive ground and we're finding an agricultural use. And it seems like that nobody wants to call a business with animals a farm. It is a farm.
Well, I think you've just made this the case that it's not farmable land anyway. So what are we preserving really, right? So it's okay. I think it would be okay to carve
It's
this
the animal
out.
rights and the feel of it.
Well,
It's the tax rate.
you'd be
on it.
preserving everything else around it. You're already asking to change its use. So
Can I recommend that we move to close comment and
Yeah,
move
I
to
was
commissioner
actually
discussion?
just gonna say if Miss Kendall got her question answered. And there's no one else that we haven't heard from that would like to come forward. Miss Finch, you're gonna say your name.
I'm Judy Finch.
Thank you. For the record, we've got everyone who's spoken on record. If there's no one else from public that would like to say something new, then I will close it and then we as commissioners can share our ideas without, no, you're fine. You're just fine. Anyone else from the public that would like to address item number 2? Okay. So that, we will close the public comment portion of our hearing, and then this is where commissioners, we're gonna talk about our ideas. We're gonna share what we think, how we feel. I think we've got a good idea of kind of a general consensus, but why don't we, Mr. Gonzalez, did you have something you want to start off with?
Yeah, I did want to say, I'm familiar with a few other properties in Utah County that are this, in Orem Vineyard area along Geneva Road, there's a couple of nurseries. The primary agricultural uses, I don't know what the zoning is on those properties, but they're nurseries, like full-fledged nurseries, and they all have event centers. Sometimes there's parking issues with those places where you see parking spilling out onto Geneva Road, but they do fill, they do weddings and other events, right? In the American Forks, Cedar Hills area, there's a couple of on North County Boulevard, like exiting the Pleasant Grove Boulevard exit. There's
Towards Lone Peak High School?
Yeah, there's a couple of also nurseries. They hold events in the evenings. Yeah, I don't have a problem with horse operations on agriculture. I recognize it as an agricultural use. I think there's a need for it in the city. There's people who own horses that want to, they can't have it on the residential property and they need to have space in the city. And I'd rather have them stay here locally than go out to, to Lehigh or to Santaquin or something. I don't have a problem with the smells from that. I don't mind if kids smell it. You guys were there long before. The school was built afterwards. So I don't have any problems with that. There are a couple things though that would hold me back from approving this, and the primary one among them is, like I said, I don't have a problem with adding this as a conditional use, as you're requesting it. My concern is that our ordinances don't have enough language to control these types of uses.
How often do these come? How often do these happen? I mean,
well, specifically the issue of event spaces. I don't necessarily think it's tied to this Hispanic population. I tie it to alcohol use, and maybe something in our ordinances that addresses a security number or a host number that's required that's significantly higher than when there's no alcohol, because there's different.
But I've been to that
there's
one.
Different problems.
The one you're talking about, the one off the greenhouse one. What's it called?
I can't remember the names, but off Geneva
No,
Road.
just in Geneva Road. I've been to that. There's no way to control how many people are going to come to a wedding reception. Our friend had a wedding there a few months back. And the parking is on a gravel road. But there's nobody at the gate. There's nobody, there's no gate. There's nobody securing
Right.
those.
But we could create ordinances that require that.
in the
And
future,
he's
yeah.
open to, to having conditions where, proof of invitations required, right? Or bartenders are there, that he's open to those types of conditions with security and entrance. I think they can be mitigated. I don't think our ordinances have a strong enough language in that as is. And so I can't, until we fix those ordinances to have those protections that are much stronger. I'll tell you what will happen, because we've had this happen in the last 4 months, was that you'll lose your conditional permit without those conditions. If you don't have, if there's problems with smell, you'll lose your business, because no one will want to have their reception there if it stinks. If they find the building's ugly, you won't be renting it out. But and then I put that on you. But as far as the use, I do see this as preserving the agricultural use, as long as there's ongoing horse boarding operations there. I feel really comfortable with that, actually.
Well, this is just the beginning steps too. There's a lot to be done. So, that's, that's to be seen. It's hard to predict,
I wanted to interrupt her for a minute and talk about the thing that's been mentioned a couple times, is that the farms will disappear if we don't allow things like this, because the developers will take over, or somehow the people at the city will decide that their ideas are more important. And I feel like that's maybe something we've seen historically happen in areas, but I feel like what we've seen happen in the last couple of years in Provo has shown that we recognize the value in these lands, and the general plan has some pretty good teeth in it right now for preserving the agricultural lands. And that language that may or may not be interpreted the same by different people, I feel like is not saying until someone at the city decides they like their idea better, though maybe you could argue that that's what you've seen happen. But I feel like, first of all, nothing on the south side can ever develop because that's a conservation area. But this area to the north, I think it would take some pretty persuasive, good projects for someone to agree that agriculture wasn't happening anymore. I guess if agriculture isn't happening, then that's the grounds. If someone says, I don't want to grow on this land anymore, then they could themselves apply to change their own land. But I feel like there's teeth in the general plan that makes it so someone's not going to pull it out from underneath you to be able to farm your land. So only if we change the zoning to be more permissive, with requests that are asking to do more things than are already allowed, that doesn't feel like a threat to me. So I don't know if that affects anything we're trying to decide, but I just wanted to sort of defend that. I feel like the agricultural lands right now they have some protections on them that haven't been there in the past, and I like that. Mr. Whitlock, you look like you have an idea in your head.
Well, I just have a couple questions. Maybe I should ask staff earlier, but we're processing this all. Isn't the planning commission allowed to require additional conditions when granting these permits, or no?
Mr. Pepperoni?
Sure, you're recommending body to the city council on legislative items. You can suggest to the city council anything you would like to add, anything that would make sense to you or make you more comfortable with this.
So you're not asking specifically, you're asking about specific requests. So each time somebody said, I want to have something like this, we could pile extra conditions on a conditional use permit.
That's what I'm asking about, more not the general change to the.
Can you pile more conditions on a conditional use request?
Yes, the reason why I ask is because in the code that I'm reading, it says the uses shall comply with the requirements of the section and shall also comply with any additional conditions resulting from a planning commission hearing.
So that's what that's referring to is if the planning commission feels like there is some impact, the conditional use request is creating, you can suggest or require conditions to mitigate that impact. But any conditions that you impose have to be directly related to a perceived impact that request is creating.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
But that
The-
doesn't answer the question of whether it should be allowed universally. You're just saying if we were to allow it universally, would there be an extra safeguard in place?
Yes, because I feel like we're having the tenor of this conversation is like, if we allow this, then every single time anybody does this, we'll have to approve it without taking it on a case by case basis. And I feel like that's not the case.
Mr. Pepperoni, when you add an item to a list of conditional uses allowed, do you tack on like the qualifiers for how to determine if that conditionally, like, does each land use code have its own list of conditions that you?
Not everyone, but those that are seen as the most impactful, like cell towers, like dance halls. So in 1434, right around 280, there are all these other additional conditions with those types of CUPs. So if this were going to go forward,
Then there would be language added
that's
to
what I
that.
would suggest we do, that in that section of the code, 1434, we would list, and some of the things Mr. Finch has offered, those types of
Those are good
things.
ideas.
I don't think it's all been fleshed out,
Right.
but that's how I think this would most properly be done if that's the route the planning commission and city council want to go. That's the most responsible way to
Yeah.
advance it. Right.
Makes sense. So just some of my thoughts. So my sister got married a couple years ago and it was down in Arizona in almost the exact same type of venue. It was for the reception. It was an agriculture settings, animals around, there were hay rides for the kids. It's a beautiful event. And so I just kind of respectfully disagree with staff's opinion that this is not a fundamental agriculture use. I think when you look about the general trends around agriculture, it's becoming less and less economically viable, and you need to add additional revenue streams in order for these businesses to continue to operate. So I think it's a very natural progression of legitimate add-on businesses that make sense within the agricultural context, which is exactly what the code says. I feel pretty strongly about that personally.
Okay.
So I would like to find a way to make this work, but adding additional conditions to address the particular concerns, and then trust the process and the planning commission to say, on a case by case basis, we'll make sure this makes sense.
Mr. Pepperoni.
Then I would suggest that the planning commission take a vote, that if a majority of you think this is legitimate to advance as a conditional use, that you continue the items, the staff can bring that back to you. If a majority of you don't think this should continue discussion as a conditional use, don't make us go through brain damage of writing that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts anyone wants to share about this? Ms. Kendall?
Well, Mr. Pepperoni, so is there another option to create a subzone?
Yes, there is. Yeah,
And
either
would
by
that be-
doing a subzone of A1 or something else that's more commercial. Yes, that certainly is an option.
And would the city feel better about that because you'd have more control that way?
On one hand, the going through the rezone process would give us more control, yes. But this is so closely related to other conditional uses, similar conditional uses, that we probably ought to just put it forward as a conditional use.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any dance halls in agricultural areas in Provo? I have like memories of going to barn dances as a college student, but maybe I made that up.
We'll hold one for you.
Thank you.
Thinking you're footloose, right?
Yeah. I heard someone say there's one on Geneva Road. Is that a real thing?
Cherry Hill Farm's been there for years and years and years. I know they used to do that.
Oh, that one.
Will you,
I
okay,
don't think they've done that for a long time, but I could be wrong.
okay. Before the rezoning codes
But
and dinosaurs.
I mean, I assume that dancing is happening at a wedding.
Yeah.
More.
Well, I just wondered because I thought maybe, like, to me, a dance hall and a wedding venue are one and the same as far as impact goes. You've got all the traffic, you've got noise, you've got later hours, so To me, if one is already allowed or we've seen it happen successfully, then maybe we could use that as a model for what it would look like with this.
We're sure dancing is permitted in Provo.
As long as there's a distance between you. Footloose dancing is only allowed in Lehigh. One question I had was if they've had weddings before, what's the difference between saying you can have a wedding in my property and I have a wedding venue? Like, I can have a wedding reception in my backyard and I don't even, I mean, I guess technically I need to have a permit to have it.
It's the building. I mean,
It's that they want to put a building there.
Building.
When you have a
people and
wedding at your house, it's a one-off. When they do it every week, we need a business license, we need a building
Okay.
permit, we need
So
occupancy regulations.
that's the
Right.
line that it crosses. I agree that this feels agricultural enough to me. Some suggestions that I had as far as recommendations for conditions, if we wanted to go that route, would be maybe the size, the acreage of a farm. If we're talking about universal citywide application, then maybe a farm that's super small wouldn't be as conducive to a farm that has more space to do something like this, but maybe the parking requirements and the setback requirements and the landscaping requirements and the signage and all of that would take care of the size requirement. Do we want to have a limit to the number of people that can attend based on acreage? Would the parking requirements take care of that? Is there something that would need to be allowed or written in conditionally that the parking ordinance wouldn't already address, like the number of spaces, the lighting, the security, all that?
I think that's one of the, I guess a reservation that I have is like we see an aerial view of a model building, but we don't know, the square footage. We don't know the fire occupancy or the capacity.
When we met initially with, sorry to interrupt, the fire marshal gave us.
Will you come up to microphone?
In our very first meeting with the staff, the fire marshal was there and he gave us numbers. So they have numbers that we're going to have to comply with.
Right.
And so
I think what he's saying is
But
because
for us,
we're trying to make a universal application, it's hard to know like what setbacks or whatever should,
no, I mean, we might,
or the other way around.
want to have a special, additional parking then as a condition, based on the occupancy or the square footage of the building. And we don't have that information. So it's hard for me to pluck a number of,
Right.
you need to provide this many parking spaces. You need to provide, whatever other conditions.
Well, the existing conditional
sit
permit
down.
has a parking requirement based on the occupancy. So it's like one stall per every 4 in occupancy.
And that might not be adequate. I mean,
How many people come to a wedding in a car? Probably 2 on average.
It's just part of it.
Well, I think a lot of this is what the city's saying. If we decide that we like this concept, that we think we could put enough protections in place with conditions on the conditional use, then we say, okay, let's postpone this, and they can come up with what they think is going to protect
All
the
right,
city's interests
let's
best.
take a quick head nod vote or hand raise vote. How many of us feel that this is a bona fide agricultural use that protects agriculture? If that's the goal of the general plan, is to preserve the agricultural areas in Provo, to protect that agricultural feel of parts of Provo, do we feel like this use promotes that use or promotes that goal?
Yes.
Just raise your hand if you think this promotes an agricultural goal. Okay. What other things would we want to sort of measure? Do we feel like bringing traffic into an agricultural area like this is in conflict with the agricultural use?
No.
No. I feel like the argument that the school has huge traffic flow at certain times of day. That sports park is going to do way more than any wedding venue will ever do. So I have a really hard time arguing on the traffic stand.
Or when you go to like pumpkin patches and you go to those kind of events, it's the same situation. And those are.
Yeah, I don't see how there's more load on any of these things from this use versus pumpkin patches
Yeah.
personally
And
at peak volumes.
as a mitigation, there's at a wedding reception, people are coming and going at different times. They're not all
At the same
showing
time.
up exactly
Yeah.
one time. Leaving
I
at
actually,
exact
then that's
one
what
time.
makes it
That's
even
true.
better.
Yeah.
Makes it less impactful.
Absolutely, that's a mitigation.
All right, I think that in answer to staff's question, we as a planning commission feel that this use is compatible with the idea of an agricultural zone. Most of us do. And so I feel like, with a motion, we could possibly ask them to bring us some protective conditional language that would enable this to be added to the code.
Could I throw out a random idea? There's
Please.
one caveat. I do feel strongly about what we're putting forward. Just one small caveat is, and I don't know how you put this in code, but like that it's actually done within the character of an agricultural setting. Like he's planning to build a barn, right? And so it's clearly part of like the vibe, the feel, of agriculture, but you wouldn't want someone to put like a techno dance club in the middle. That's where I think you'd
Like-
get into trouble and would break the intent of the zoning.
Yeah,
language.
but what's to prevent a barn venue to be rented out as a dance club that,
That's fine. I'm more talking about the external.
so the,
You mean
you're
like-
talking
structure
about
being
the
built.
look,
Yeah,
like
the
they can have
structure,
whatever
yeah.
function they
Like
want.
our-
Yeah, inside, I don't
agricultural
care. but-
Design approval.
Yeah, something along those lines where it's clearly being built to take advantage and augment the agricultural pastoral feeling of the space rather than a modern new building that has no look of agriculture whatsoever.
Yeah, like a box would not feel, we would feel a little bit gypped if a box went up
Yeah,
as an agro
The
business.
smell of the cows.
Another thing that you'd want to do is protect the agricultural land that's left. So you wouldn't want somebody saying, well, then now I want to turn all of my agricultural land into this use, right?
So how do you limit that though?
So a
With
a
language?
percentage of
a percentage of the
property
property, yeah.
has to be maintained for agro, like
Which would automatically
agricultural
limit
operations.
the size of the production, because if you have a small farm, you would only be able to have a small venue.
Yeah, that's
So-
probably the most logical heuristic you could use.
Okay. So, let's make a list of our ideas to pass along to staff. And then we can talk about a motion to formalize it. But Mr. Pepperoni, I think the idea we all disliked was a percentage of the usable acreage that could be used for the event space. Maybe some additional parking requirements for event spaces that aren't already in the dance hall or whatever code for, because most of those have been downtown where we're talking about shared parking.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then the
Mr.
character-
Whitlock's idea about the character of it, so maybe like a design review element for it. Anything that you think would be, like Mr. Gonzalez was saying, that your conditional use permit would be revoked if you don't do this, so.
Do you want to impose additional security
Okay.
requirements for this use?
Do we want them
And-
to be general or specific to alcohol?
I think there should,
Both?
I don't know, I think there should be both, Mr. Pepperoni. Like I would recommend that
I don't know
the
if you can
risks
do
are
that.
different with
Can
each
you put
one.
those in stipulations?
I think you
I
can.
mean,
First of all, I don't think you're going to get a liquor license in an ag zone. Secondly, with the school being where it is, I think that's
Oh,
another
yeah.
strike against you. So,
Thank you. I had forgotten the proximity to the school.
600 feet of school or 300 feet of school, like there's no way.
So you think that the
The
liquor,
ABC,
the
if they
licensing,
found
business license, liquor license requirements will take care of some of those issues on a case-by-case basis? Okay? Setbacks, additional setbacks, or signage, there's probably not signage, a whole lot of signage language in the agricultural zone or in the ordinance for signs. So are we going to need to address that in whatever you bring forward? You should just sit on the front row.
Yeah, I think lights and signage is a good point.
So the ag zone would allow very little of that now, and it's probably going to be less than what venue operators like this are going to want.
Okay. Well, honestly, if you want a country bumpkin feel, then you can end your party at 9 or when the sun goes down, or, like that may just have to be part of the, or are you saying we should allow it with the conditional use permit with different protections?
No, I think that we should not now then also starting to allow more signage. I don't think we should do that. Again, that's the opposite direction of what the ag zone is. But you just conflated signage with hours of operation. What your last comment
Well, the
was
reason I said
related to
hours of operation was in regards to lighting. That if lighting standards were such that you couldn't have additional lights, then your event wouldn't be able to go till 10, 11 PM. So that's why I was just wondering if you're saying you would suggest to keep the agricultural feel, that we wouldn't go there and address lighting and whatever because it's not allowed. We want to keep it that way because it's that way for a reason.
So as soon as we create a parking lot, we have to have lighting.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to have to address lighting, and I think we should do it in ways that keeps the lighting within the property as much as possible. We avoid as much light pollution as
Directional
possible.
lighting and
Right.
the different.
So I think we should
strength of
have some guidelines in the conditions about lighting, yes.
Okay.
I do agree with that.
I don't think we should try to limit hours of operation because I think that would be too burdensome on
Right.
somebody trying
But
to
that's
make a
why I just
profitable
wondered if
business.
we don't address
Right.
lighting, if that would by nature limit those hours of operation because they can't have the lights.
Yeah, I
after
would suggest
whatever.
we should address lighting in the conditions.
Okay. What about signage? Let the agricultural signage take care of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Because this isn't a business that you're driving by and go, oh, let's stop and have a wedding,
Yeah.
right? You're going to it because it's a destination you've been invited to,
Okay.
which makes signage less important.
Okay. I just want to make sure that we're not, if we don't address it, that we're not allowing it to become, I'm going to build this huge farm structure that's a 50-foot silo, and because there's no height restrictions in the agricultural zone, I can go ahead and make, so I just want to make sure that it was okay. Anything else? Most of our agricultural land is close to the airport, and there's some height restrictions and other things that fall in some of those overlays as well. So that may just by nature take care of things. All right. I think we've given staff a good feeling for what we like and don't like, what we're worried about. And I'm ready to entertain a motion on what I think will be a continuance of this item. If I'm reading our opinions correctly. Does anyone want to make a motion? Ms. Kendall?
I'll make a motion. I motion that we postpone item number 2, Barry Finch requests an ordinance text amendment to section 14.08.020 until further information from the city.
Okay, so I will reword that and say we're continuing it until the city comes forward with language that we feel more comfortable with. Okay, do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second.
We have a second by Mr. Whitlock, and the motion was by Ms. Kendall. Any discussion on the motion as stated? Okay, we have a motion to Mr. Gonzalez.
Do we need to enumerate those conditions we talked about? Okay.
He's got him. Yeah, on a continuance, we don't need to be, we're not asking the developer to bring things forward that we would probably want to put it in there. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. We have a motion for item number 2 to continue it and for staff to bring some more refined language about some conditions for conditional use permits. We'll start with Mr. Whitlock with a vote.
Aye.
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 I will also vote aye. So all 6 of us are in favor of continuing item number 2 with hopes of finding a way to refine it. Thank you. Thank you, Finches. All right. Item number 3, Boyd Loveless requests a zone map amendment from the R120 zone to the R110 zone for 3 existing residential properties located between 5065 North Canyon Road and 5075 North Canyon Road in the North Timpview neighborhood. And Mr. Wright from Development Services will present this item to us.
All right, thank you. So the applicant's property located here on these outlined in red here is 3 residential parcels. each with an existing single-family home on the property. It's approximately 1.36 acres of land that they're requesting to rezone. The applicant owns all three of those parcels. And they're currently in the R120 zone, and the request is to go to the R110 zone. So single-family residential, the 20 designates a minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet. The 10 for the R110 is a 10,000 square foot lot size. A few differences between the zones there. Obviously the lot size is the biggest one. Lot width and lot depth are 10 feet less on the R110 zone. So on these properties, the lot width, when it was brought in from the county and annexed into the city, those properties don't meet the current lot widths that the zone that they're in requires. So they're what we call non-conforming to those current minimum requirements. The applicant he lives in the property in the middle there in that home, and his backyard has a pretty significant slope, and so his plan would be able to realign the properties, and the home on the north on the top there would be one that he would like to realign that property line there to get more rear yard from that property for his property, and then potentially sell the home or demolish
So like a
the
side
home.
yard to the north?
Correct, yeah, to give him kind of a level yard to be able to have. So that's really the intent of what this is trying to accomplish. As part of that, then he'd be able to go in and kind of even out the lot widths. They'd be 10 feet less than what they currently are, so help bring the property more into conformance with the current zone. When we look at zone changes, we also look at the general plan, make sure it's consistent, which it is in this case. It calls for residential. Doesn't distinguish exactly what type of residential, just some residential. So this would be compatible in that regard. And so staff's recommendation would be to forward a positive recommendation for this rezone onto the city council. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I actually am going to jump in and ask a question here first. So I see 4 bigger rooftop structures and a few small ones, but you said there's only 3 houses. So is the one on the furthest north a house?
Yeah, that's a home.
And then there's the L-shaped one, upside down, backwards L-shaped one in the middle. And then what's the silver one to the south of that? Is that a garage or a shed or a stable or something? Wood shop. Okay. And then the one closest to Canyon Road is also a house. So those are the 3 houses.
Correct.
And then the big, okay. My question, question for staff is, if the applicant were to change his mind after a rezone were approved, would he be able to subdivide these existing lots into smaller parcels? Which actually I'd be okay with, but the second part of that is, if so, would these potential lots still be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood? So the surrounding area is basically R110 or bigger. Because everything else to the left is down that steep hill. So I'm not even considering that as adjacent for all intents and purposes. Like, my interpretation is that's okay. There's a nice barrier of a hill there, and that's a good buffer for the zones. But if we were to decrease the zoning, would that make the possibility for houses that could go in that space out of alignment with the density we're looking for?
I don't think so. I think if it were vacant land and it was rezoned to R110, they'd come in and they potentially could get more than 3 lots.
But with the houses the way they are, it's unlikely.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that's the intent. Is it possible? Probably. Would that, if that happened, would that be bad? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it would fit in with what's to the south. Across Canyon Road there is, Utah County property, which is mostly all single-family residential there. So I think it would be compatible and fit in. And if an extra lot got created, I don't see an issue there.
Okay.
It's on an arterial street.
And do I understand you correctly that R110 is still not going to make the lots conforming all the way with setback requirements? It's just going to make it closer, but it's not going to solve the problem entirely.
So just rezoning it to R110 will bring it closer. His intent after is to go in and kind of clean up those property lines and
then that would
and
fix the
then
problem.
in that process, I think his goal would be to try to get those to either be in compliance or get as close as he can. So
I like that end goal. That seems very reasonable. Okay, commissioners, any other questions for Mr. Wright? Okay, thank you.
thanks.
I assume you're Mr. Loveless?
Yeah.
All right, we will give you 15 minutes. If you need it all, you can take it all.
I don't need 15 minutes. The only thing I'm trying to do is the house on the very north was built in 1928. 1926, excuse me. The house on the south was built in 1928. That's the home that my mom and my dad and my grandma and my grandpa died in. My mom was born in it. That property has been in our family since 1870 something. So that's the original homestead. The home on the north has outlived its usefulness. So to make my backyard so that it will remain my backyard in the future, I want to tear that down, put a new home there, and that's it. But in order to maintain my backyard,
Just to
I need
realign
to be
those
able to
boundaries.
break that off as an R110.
Okay,
The workshop, I don't have any plans of getting rid of it. My mom's house, no.
okay. Any questions for Mr. Loveless, commissioners? Mr. Knudsen is formulating a question, but he doesn't have it yet. No? Okay. I thought he said 1 second. I was waiting for the idea to come. Okay, we're good. Thank you. I see no unemployed or non-city staff here aside from Mr. Loveless. So I'm going to say we will give you 20 seconds to come forward with public comment should there be anyone hiding in the hall.
Can I disagree with something though?
Please.
You said that hillside.
Tell me your opinion on that.
Well, the hillside, the reason that those property lines are jagged like that is because that property used to be ours. But in order to have square footage for that building down there,
Mm-hmm.
that's the reason those property lines are jagged. So the hillside does have use. It has square footage. Square footage is very important. That's why I'm moving it from an R120 to an R110. That square footage is important.
I agree. The reason I said that it didn't matter was that to me, it created a zoning land use barrier.
It
So that
does.
you know nothing's ever going to build there and it's a nice buffer between the higher density below
No,
you.
just the homeless.
Oh, that's, yeah. Thank you. Okay. We will close the public hearing portion, public comment portion of this and discuss amongst ourselves. Commissioners, do we have any concerns about this request? Any questions about it? Any ideas about it? I think a new lot there, if it happened, would be fine with me. It seems very compatible with what's around it. And good intention behind it that even if the mind was changed, wouldn't be the end of the world, so. Commissioners? All right, we have nothing but silence and head nodding for those of you who are riveted at home listening to our discussion.
I'm ready to make a motion.
All right, Mr. Gonzalez, I'm ready to entertain a motion.
I'd like to recommend approval of item number 3, Boyd Loveless requested zone map amendment from the R112 zone to the R11 zone for 3 existing residential properties located between 5065 North Canyon Road and 5075 North Canyon Road, North Timpview neighborhood.
Thank you. And I would clarify that that's R120 zone to R110, just because that stands for 20,000 square feet and 10,000 square feet, so it might matter. We have a motion by Mr. Gonzalez to forward a positive recommendation for the municipal council for item number 3 as written. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Whoa. I think Raylene got that one. She was quieter, but she totally got it. So we're going to give the seconded motion to Raylene Wallin, and we will, any discussion on that motion or the second? Okay, we'll start with Mr. Whitlock.
Aye.
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 And I will also vote aye. So that is all 6 of us present tonight forwarding a positive recommendation to the municipal council for item number 3. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for your patience. I move to adjourn.
Do we have a second? Raylene is voting before we have a second.
I'll second
Okay,
that.
Mr. Whitlock is seconding the motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.